Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining me here today. If you're new, I'm Amanda. Welcome to the channel where we are all about shattering the mental health stigma. If you haven't already, please make sure you make sweet love to that subscribe button, give the bell a few kisses so you're not missing any of this content designed to help you with your mental health or help you help someone else. Today I'm changing things up a bit by diving into a topic that is very close to my heart, unschooling, also known as free schooling. As a mom and a mental health advocate and someone who desperately regrets dropping out of high school, I've been reflecting a lot on this trend. I've been putting off making this video for a long time because I know that people can get sensitive if they feel like you're attacking their parenting skills, but this is something I can't stay silent about anymore. I think it's crucial that we have a conversation about it, and I'm not here to hurt anyone's feelings, but I also live by the philosophy that if nobody speaks up, unhealthy and unhelpful trends and beliefs are only going to perpetuate. I chose to title this influencer Idiocracy as a nod to the 2006 film that was made to be a comedy, but as time goes on, is starting to look more and more like a documentary. So here's an excerpt to show you what I mean.
As the 21st century began, human evolution was at a turning point. Natural selection, the process by which the strongest, the smartest, the fastest reproduced in greater numbers than the rest, a process which had once favored the noblest traits of man, now began to favor different traits. Most science fiction of the day predicted a future that was more civilized and more intelligent. But as time went on, things seemed to be heading in the opposite direction, a dumbing down. How did this happen? Evolution does not necessarily reward intelligence. With no natural predators to thin the herd, it began to simply reward those who reproduced the most and left the intelligent to become an endangered species.
As it said, evolution doesn't necessarily reward intelligence. It rewards who is reproducing the most. And I think you'll see just how relevant this is as we dive into this topic. For those of you that might not be familiar, unschooling is an educational philosophy that theoretically allows children to learn through their natural life experiences as opposed to a traditional structured curriculum. Now, I'll be the first to admit, as one of those moms that leans on the kind of crunchy side, this sounded super liberating. I've always been a huge advocate of teaching my son, who is now 13, life skills such as healthy communication, healthy emotional expression, how to read a nutrition label, and critical thinking. But I've also been adamant about teaching him more formal education. When he was about 6, we made this jar and decorated it together, and I filled it with the names of all these different influential people like Malala, Neil Armstrong, but then I included pop culture figures like Hulk Hogan. And the aim was to draw one each week and then learn about that person. The first one we drew was Anne Frank, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to teach this in an age-appropriate way to a 6-year-old? Well, we ended up going into his walk-in closet, and I told him to pretend that there were really bad men outside the door and that we couldn't go outside, that they wanted to hurt us, that we couldn't get food, that he was only going to have a toy or two to play with, that he couldn't go to school, that he couldn't play with other kids. And then I gave him some paper and asked him to write about how that would make him feel. Now, obviously, we only stayed in there for about 30 minutes, but this is something he remembers 7 years later, and he has done his own research on Anne Frank because of it. I say that because I get the allure of unschooling. I really do. This experience was a great bonding moment for him and I, and it was also a really awesome learning experience for him. Freedom, creativity, and letting kids learn at their own pace sounds great, right? But as we explore this path today, I want you to consider the potential dangers that can also come along with it. The parents that are choosing this route seem to be fairly diverse. This doesn't seem to be a liberal issue or a conservative issue, but something that unsatisfied parents are turning to because for a variety of reasons, they feel like traditional school is failing their kids. I think we can all empathize with them wanting what is best for their children, even if we feel like their reasons are based on false premises or incomplete information. I've observed that there seem to be 5 categories that parents cite as their reasons for choosing unschooling. The first is a belief in government control. Many parents that opt for unschooling are feeling that traditional schooling is reflecting a broader agenda of government control over their children's education and upbringing, and they often perceive public education as being influenced by political ideologies, and they worry that the regulations and mandates that come from the school districts, such as state testing or attendance requirements, they see these as limiting them to providing a personalized and flexible environment for their children. I want to show you guys a few examples as we discuss these different reasons, and the first one comes from one of the most notorious unschooling advocates, thekelseyrhae.
Do y'all remember the video that I made about my first grader being threatened to being expelled if he missed too many days? Like, the school system, you can only miss so many days, and then they like call DSS on you or some shit. It's fucking crazy. So through this experience, and also since I've had him in school, I've had a very weird, icky, like my intuition, my motherly instincts are screaming at me that the schooling system is not for my kids, okay? So like, I've not wanted to put him in there, but let's just face it, it's a free babysitter. And you know,
Excuse me, ma'am? I don't think that she could have found a more tactless, disrespectful, and poorly worded way of saying that. What a slap in the face to the teachers who are working tirelessly for paltry pay and benefits. Look, I get that most parents, especially working parents, we all can relate to the idea that having the kids go somewhere else for a while so that we can have some of the pressure and the responsibility taken off of us is wonderful, but don't minimize what educators do while you're expressing this. Second, nobody is calling any authority unless the absence is unexcused. Control exists for a reason in many cases, and if your child is missing a lot of school, somebody should be checking up on them, because while you might be a great parent, Kelsey might be an awesome parent. I know nothing about this woman except this video, but little Timmy might be getting neglected and abused, and it would go unreported and unnoticed if nobody is checking on him with these unexcused absences. Hence the need for doctor's notes. And also, if the school assumes that he's home with you and you assume that he's at school, they could easily go missing. Your child could easily go missing, which is part of the reason that this is protocol, because of cases like this happening.
Got shit to do. We're trying to create a financial, stable life for these kids because we didn't have that. But anyways, so I have decided, I'm pretty sure I've made the final decision that I'm going to be doing unschooling. Now, a lot of people have a lot of shit to say about this, right? There is public school, there's online public school, there's homeschool, and then there's unschool. It's kind of hard to say. So public school, you go into a brick and mortar building, right? Online public school, you have to still show up to school or show up to these classes, but it's online. And then homeschool is you're still using the schooling curriculum to teach your child, and you still have to turn in paperwork to the government, and you still have to have you have to check some boxes. You still have to check boxes.
Now we're getting to the meat of it, the options and what is driving her toward her decision to unschool her child. Now, I completely understand and respect her instinct that traditional public schooling might not be what's best for her kid, and that's fine. I will say it's kind of weird that in listing out the options, she didn't mention Montessori, which is what I had my son in for the first few years of his education, because it is more child-led and has less structure than a traditional school. So I think it's pretty weird that she left that out. Why do we check boxes? Why do we have a curriculum? Isn't that just shady government control? Yep, it's totally just a sneaky way to ensure that kids have basic knowledge instead of letting them debate all day about whether or not unicorns are real, or about FNAF lore, or perfecting their TikTok persona. Which, by the way, none of those things would they even be able to do if they were never taught to read and critically think.
What I don't want to do. I don't want to check boxes about my life and my child for the fucking government. Why? Why are we so in this mindset that we have to do this? You know what I mean? Like, the government won't let me. What the fuck? What the fuck? Okay, so anyways, unschooling is where, I'm still learning, I'm still researching, but it's basically where you don't have to check a box. You teach your kid what you want them to learn, and a lot of the times you leave it up to them of what they want to learn. And there is studies that show kids who do unschooling and even homeschooling are actually faster learners, and I want to say smarter, than public school kids. I'm pretty sure there's studies out there, okay? Now, this is not me talking shit about anybody's decisions, okay? But I'm pretty much to that point of I've decided when he's done with this schooling year, I'm going to be doing unschooling. We're going to be doing like gardening and baking, cooking and cleaning and life skills. And I'm going to teach him about fucking taxes. I'm going to teach him about money. Like, I'm not raising a child that's dependent on the fucking government. I refuse. My life has been hard. I don't really, I mean, what? I'm 30 now. So if I live until I'm like 80, hopefully maybe 100, I don't know. But the point to this is I want my kids to live a good life, and I want to create a legacy for the rest of my downline of my family. And so, it's going to be a really good experience, and I hope that you guys are following along, because I'm going to show y'all every fucking thing. So let me know, what are your thoughts, opinions, or advice when it comes to unschooling?
Did she just refer to her descendants as her downline? I mean, say that you're in a culty, scammy, unethical pyramid scheme without saying it. Yikes. But there's studies. I mean, she's pretty sure there's studies. There might be studies. I'm convinced there's no studies. Cite your sources, sis, and I might take that part seriously. Also, she said it herself that homeschooling and unschooling are not the same thing, but then she tries to mash them together when she's citing her imaginary studies. Homeschooling actually has been proven to be beneficial for kids when done correctly. But in most states, parents are required to have a college education and meet certain requirements to homeschool. And homeschool requires those dreaded checkboxes that let us know that our kids are on track. There's no real way to do empirical research on unschooling because, wait for it, there's no structure or guidelines for what it actually freaking means. It works for some, sure, if you have a motivated child and you have some level of structure. But not all kids have intrinsic motivation, and kids aren't able to see why learning is important. The problem is that there's no oversight whatsoever with unschooling, so some parents will and are allowed to do absolutely nothing. There are no regulations to ensure that they're learning anything at all. They might just be scrolling social media and playing video games all day. And what about the kids that don't want to learn? There are plenty of things that you don't want to learn, but we still need to know. There are endless things that are important to prepare children for adulthood and for their future. There's no way for them to know what those things are. You don't know what you don't know, and there's no way to guide yourself toward what you don't see. Like, I'm curious how she's going to teach her children about taxes if they never took interest in reading or math to reach the levels needed to perform this task. Another reason that gets cited a lot from parents pursuing unschooling are the curriculum limitations of traditional public school. Now, this is the one that I probably relate to the most out of all of the reasons. I can see myself reflecting on it a lot if somebody was trying to pitch the idea of unschooling to me. Parents, like we saw with Kelsey, are often expressing frustration for what they see as limitations to life skills and things being taught in the standard curricula. The next video is actually from a girl, Gurululu, who was unschooled, and she's giving her perspective on it.
So here's a fun fact about me. I was unschooled. Y'all probably heard that and you were like, unschooled? You hear that and your initial response would be like, well, there's probably so much you don't know. And yeah, there's probably a lot I don't know about math or history or science, but there is a lot more that I know about myself, about the world, about traveling, about people, about respecting people.
Let's be real, there's all things that we don't know. And it's great that unschooling helped her learn more about herself and helped her learn these valuable life skills. I love this for her. However, understanding math and history doesn't negate personal growth. In fact, I would argue that it can enhance it. I mean, math sharpens critical thinking skills and problem-solving skills, and I think that these are huge components of personal growth. History provides a context for the world that we live in, which I think could enrich her experiences when she's traveling and interacting with diverse cultures. These areas of knowledge can coexist with personal exploration, and I think that could give her a more well-rounded experience that deepens her understanding of herself and of the world. I think that embracing both structured learning and personal experiences can lead to a fuller education and a fuller understanding.
And about my own individual talents and gifts that I was able to nurture with the time that I would have spent going to school. Here I am, 18 years old. I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. But the funny thing is, neither do my friends that spent their whole childhood doing school. They spent countless hours as children learning all this stuff, and now they're going to college for something that they have no interest in. I have no plan, but I know myself, and I'm not going to settle.
I'm happy for her that she's not going to settle. I really am. And who has their life figured out at 18, right? I'd argue that most of us don't. Some people take gap years between high school and college. Some people take time to explore. Some people don't go to college at all and pursue other passions. You do you. Isn't it a bit presumptuous, though, to assume that anyone going to college is being forced to, and they're not pursuing it because they know their passion and themselves? I get that this is a big reason to consider unschooling as an option, as an alternative approach to fill in these gaps. Totally understandable, and I agree wholeheartedly that there are definitely gaps. There are plenty of things that kids should be learning and aren't, but the bottom line is that unschooling, due to a dissatisfaction with the curriculum or a lack of life skills, assumes that parents are qualified without any training or guidance to be the one to teach the core things that are needed to be learned along with these life skills in a way that children can truly learn them as opposed to teaching them in addition. For a simple example, math is a progression. You can't teach a kid how to understand making change or comparing prices if they don't know place values, like the units, the tens, the hundreds, and they can't grasp place values if they never learned addition and subtraction, and they can't grasp addition and subtraction if they never mastered counting and number recognition. A lot of things have to be taught progressively. They have to be taught in a certain order for kids to grasp them. Proponents of unschooling don't seem to understand that kids have to learn how to learn things, and they have to be developing foundations in order to understand concepts. Another one I hear a lot is the structure of a classroom. So the idea of their kid sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day is restrictive. This structure can limit creativity and engagement. It can be really difficult for children with learning disabilities, and it can really perpetuate an authoritarian atmosphere as opposed to an educational one. And it really just isn't conducive for the energy levels of young children, which seems to be the age focus for most unschooling parents. This can lead them to exploring unschooling as a way to offer a learning environment that is more tailored to their different learning styles. Another one that I totally understand. So let's watch this video from Wild Mother to get a better idea and understanding of what's going through their minds.
My children are missing out by not going to public school. They're missing out on sitting at a desk for 8 hours. They're missing out on being told to be quiet when they're trying to learn to socialize. They're missing out on trying to hold their body still when all it wants to do is move.
As I mentioned with Kelsey, I feel like nobody's talking about Montessori, which is what I did for my son. Montessori emphasizes self-directive learning, hands-on activities, and collaborative play, which can foster socializing. It fosters independence and critical thinking by allowing children to choose their own activities within a prepared environment tailored more to their developmental and individual needs. The role of the educator is to guide rather than direct, supporting each child's individual learning pace and interests. There's a lot of options for activities that require movement. This method encourages a love for learning and respects the natural development of each child. There's still benchmarks or checkboxes to make sure that kids aren't falling behind, to see if they need support, but there's far less structure in how they get there, how they get to those benchmarks.
They're missing out on memorizing things that they won't remember the next day. They're missing out on being bullied. They're missing out on sitting inside for 8 hours a day. They're missing out on being shamed for not knowing something. They're missing out on harmful relationships. And sure, they won't get the normal experience. But why would we want the normal experience when there's other options that support their mental health and their learning, give them the opportunity to pursue their curiosities and passions, allow them to move their body and learn through play, socialize, be loud, and learn to love themselves just as they are. So maybe they're missing out on some things, but I think they're gaining a lot more.
Are they getting to socialize though? I'm genuinely asking. I have no reason to believe one way or another. All I see is what I see in this video, where I didn't see them interacting with anyone aside from themselves, the two siblings, and the parent. And it's very important for kids to be interacting with their peers that are around their age and learning different ways of thinking, different cultures, different personalities, so that they're prepared for that in the real world. I can't speak for all school districts, and I know that for some, especially the ones that are in small towns that are really far away from big cities, they can be a little behind on cultural development. But this idea that kids sit in a desk all day for 8 hours is largely antiquated. There's a growing recognition in the public school system for the importance of movement and active learning. Many school districts are changing their approaches to how young children learn and how they spend their time in the classroom. These changes are driven by research on child development, the benefits of physical activity, and the need to support diverse learning styles. Recent polls show that the average grade schooler is spending about 40% of their time in the desk, and the majority of their time doing other activities like moving around the classroom or socializing or going to other teachers for various things like art and music and PE. Things like flexible seating, so allowing the students to sit on an exercise ball or sit on the floor or to sit on a stool or to stand. Things like frequent transitions and frequent brain breaks are being rapidly implemented in school districts across the country. Now, as students get older, we're talking junior high and high school, they're supposed to be developing longer attention span. Now, I could totally go on a side tangent here about the focus issues that tech addiction is exacerbating in our youth, but even in junior high and high school, teachers are becoming more understanding of kids needing to take breaks and move around. My son is in 8th grade currently, and he has the frequent transitions, the brain breaks, and the flexible seating available to him. Unschooling because you don't want your kids sitting in a desk all day is largely based on a misunderstanding of what a day looks like in the typical grade school. If your school district isn't implementing these things and your child is struggling, there's probably other children that are struggling as well. And I think that the more rational approach would be to present the research and the professional organizations that support this, like the National Education Association, the U.S. Department of Education, and the American Association of Pediatrics, just to name a few. Present this to the school board. Advocate for better procedures to be implemented. Speak with your child's teachers and administrators to find solutions to support your child's unique needs, because they probably really aren't that unique. There's probably other students that could benefit from these changes as well, which brings me to my next point. Emotional and social well-being. So concerns about bullying or the emotional health of their children can push a lot of parents toward unschooling. Now, obviously, I take that seriously. My entire channel here exists to shatter the mental health stigma, to help people, to uplift them, to empower them, to give them information about mental health, to help them make positive decisions for them, their loved ones, friends, peers. I get it, and I am very, very big on advocating for children who might not be able to express their needs or express their fears or express that things are happening to them. I did an interview a while back with Sean Kanan on bullying because he's a huge anti-bullying advocate, and he actually ended up talking to my son when we had some personal issues with bullying at school. For neurodivergent kids, the traditional classroom may not provide the individualized attention they need, making unschooling appealing as a way to support their unique emotional and social needs. For kids being bullied, parents might be rightfully concerned for their children's safety, especially if teachers and staff aren't adequately handling the situation. Both of these are things that I've experienced firsthand, and on this one, I want to share the video of a teacher named danshutes.
So number 5 is... Actually, could you guys talk about number 5 with the group, please? Thanks. Hey, come with me for a second. Okay, close your eyes and breathe. There you go. Now feel your feet on the ground. Good. Now open your eyes. You know what I heard about you the other day? That you had a basketball game on Friday and you played awesome. So when's your next game? This weekend? Perfect. I'll be there. And hey, do you think you'd be up for some one-on-one later today in gym class? First one to 10? Yeah? Alright, I'm not going to take it easy on you, okay? Alright, anyways, take as much time as you need in here, okay? And when you're ready to go, just come back out and join us, okay? Love you.
So Dan is an actual 5th grade teacher, and in this example, he sees the students struggle. He doesn't embarrass them. He pulls them aside privately to build them up by complimenting their performance at their basketball game. He offers a practical way to support them by saying, hey, let's play some basketball and stuff in gym class. I'll give you a little bit more one-on-one attention. I'll come to your game. And then he gives them space. Wow. Let me begin by saying that I am fully aware that not every teacher out there is like Dan. I've seen horrible stories of kids that are on the spectrum, kids that have anxiety or other mental health concerns being completely dismissed. My son has ADHD, and he brought to me concerns about bullying from peers and from a teacher. That teacher no longer works at the school district after I took my concerns to administration and went a bit mama wolf. To me, that was the best outcome because it means now she can't pick on other kids either. As for the peer bullies, we focused on educating my son, and we let him know that we'd be there if he needed intervention, but empowering him to see how much strength he had to stand up for himself and to fight back, not in a physical way unless necessitated, but to fight back and to stand up for himself. And guess what? We haven't needed to intervene, and we certainly haven't needed to pull him out of school. Unschooling for emotional and social well-being, however noble of an intent, deprives children of necessary social interaction. It stunts their ability to problem solve. Like with bullying, they now have no ability to problem solve, to work through these situations, to stand up for themselves. It also ignores the existence of specialized services like individualized education plans or IEPs or 504 plans, which allows the child to stay in the regular class with their peers while having accommodations that they need to thrive. There are also even alternative classes designed with special needs in mind. Unschooling out of desire to protect a child's emotional well-being doesn't consider the fact that the child standing out for being ill-educated isn't going to help them in the long run. Do you honestly think that they're not going to get bullied by their peers when they're in their 20s and they can't read or do basic math, and then they have no skills to handle it because the lack of social action means that their ability for conflict resolution was never developed? Unschooling also overlooks that many educators might catch learning disabilities that parents aren't aware of because they're not trained to recognize them. Educators can help figure out inclusive learning and diverse practices that parents just couldn't implement. I mean, what if your child is on the autism spectrum and they have a fixed singular interest? Do you really just learn about birds their whole lives and teach them about birds or whatever it is that they might be into and never nudge them toward anything else? School provides access to interventionists for kids who might need more support. Maybe they're neurodivergent. Maybe they need a speech language pathologist. Maybe they need a reading specialist. But parents who are unschooling likely won't recognize a learning disability, especially because they're normalizing their child being behind. Unschooling is actually depriving these children of these resources that parents likely won't have access to, and it's depriving them of that specialized one-on-one assistance from people trained to work with these kinds of situations. Now, the fifth reason I've observed for parents turning to unschooling for their children is a desire for their children to foster independence. These parents believe that by allowing their children to direct their own learning, they can develop critical life skills such as self-motivation, decision-making, and problem-solving. A lot of parents feel that traditional schooling doesn't really provide enough opportunities for children to take initiative or to explore their interests with any level of freedom. This video comes from influencer, I can't even say that word without bile coming up in my mouth. Mami.onami, I think is how she says it.
So it's true. My son cannot read at age 6. There's never going to be a time in my life where I can say, yeah, my son started reading when he was 5 years old. He's on the Waldorf and Montessori schedule. It's different.
Oh, no. Hard stop right there. I'm sorry I paused so early in this video, but we are going to hard stop right there. As mentioned before, yes, Montessori is more child-led, but there's still a curriculum and there's still a concern if a child is falling behind on their benchmarks. And for good reason, as it should be, because this could very well be a sign of a learning disability or that the child isn't getting the support that they need in certain areas. Maria Montessori, the founder of the Montessori philosophy, believed that children have the innate ability to start picking up reading and writing around age 2 or 3, with most of them picking it up around 4 or 5. So a child not being able to read by age 6 would be a cause for concern in a proper Montessori setting as well. Are you really okay with your kid only starting to pick up reading at age 12? I mean, what if they never pick up that interest?
But here's the thing about my kid. He's free. He's always been free. And every single day of his life is a blank canvas that he can make whatever art he wants with. Discovery, adventure, art, play, interest. This is what his day is made up of. There's no conformity. There's no needing to pretend that you're sick in order to get a day off. There's no trends. There's no ahead or behind. There's just being free, exactly the way that you are, free to learn at your own pace.
School doesn't prevent a child from exploring other interests. Passions are learned. Children's interests aren't developed in a vacuum. It's through exposure and guidance that they discover new things. It was because of school that I learned that I loved ancient Egypt, Greek mythology, Edgar Allan Poe, classic literature, writing stories. I could go on and on and on, and I could explore these things because of supportive and educated professionals. Here's the thing though, child-led learning is basically children learning time management and parents embracing and encouraging their child's interests in addition to school. Like during evenings, weekends, school breaks, holidays, summers, excused absences, excused family trips. There's plenty of time for kids to take up hobbies. There's plenty of time to teach your kids to bake or to garden, like we were hearing about earlier, to take them to museums, to have talks with them about handling difficult emotions, modeling healthy conversations and communication, all while not hindering their education. These unschooling moms are legitimately describing regular involved parenting and acting like that's something super impressive that no public school parent ever does or is capable of. Are you kidding me?
And there are so many inmates that will know so much more than me.
What?
Inmates get law degrees, get all kinds of stuff. And there's so many inmates that will say, look, this is just the way that it is. This has been a really good thing for me. Everybody else is doing it. We don't live in a creative world. This is just what it is.
Oh my God.
But would any of those inmates not trade in all of these things they've gotten used to for a chance at being free, for a chance to feel the sun on their face every single day? That's what all of this is about. Thank you.
I love her false dichotomy fallacy here. There's no in-between. There's no way you can be happy with an in-between. Now, I've talked to a lot of inmates, formerly incarcerated individuals. I myself am a formerly incarcerated individual, though I didn't spend a long time, 47 days in jail. But most of the people that are in there for the long haul, that's most of the people that I interact with, were people that are in there for a long time, sometimes even life, or people that were in there for several years. Most aren't desperate for an education just to have something to do, like it seems she's insinuating, or because they just think that it's the thing that's expected of them. Nothing's expected of them at this point. It's because they were deprived of that education growing up, and many of them turned to crime because they didn't have the intelligence or skills to cope and function in the real world. It's because they want to better themselves. Even ones that are in there for life just want to better themselves. They want to have more understanding of the world that they might not get to experience, or might not get to experience for a long time if they're the ones that are going to get out. And if they are going to get out, they want to be productive members of society at that point. As a matter of fact, many pursue degrees in education after they're released because they can understand that there can be a fulfilling balance between adventure, play, and education or work. And really, sometimes work can be adventurous if you end up pursuing something you like, or if you end up pursuing something and realizing that you enjoy it, which you wouldn't have realized had you not pursued it. This is like saying that if kids in third world countries had to choose between food and education, that they would choose food. Obviously. But having been to Haiti myself and talking to a lot of individuals, mostly women, but a lot of individuals from different third world countries, there are children that will walk miles and then sit in a mud chair in the blistering heat so that they can learn from their educators because they want to. They're already feeling the sun on their faces, but this is not an either-or situation like she's trying to create. As I said, several of these points really hit home for me, and I don't want to dismiss the concerns of the parents that are posing them. And despite the fact that I got kind of heated there a few times while I was watching these videos or while I was responding to these points, I'm not here to take away people's choices, even if I vehemently disagree with them. But some of the people in this movement seem downright hysterical, and others seem to be basing their viewpoints and their decisions on misinformation or incomplete information. And then there are some that just seem dead set on indoctrinating their kids as opposed to educating them. What happens to society if future generations are uneducated? Again, take a peek at Idiocracy. True education involves critical thinking and learning about things that you might not agree with. I want to talk about a couple of concepts that are relevant to this conversation and give you a couple of bite-sized history lessons to hopefully help you see a pattern. These concepts are moral panics and folk devils. Moral panics arise when a particular group of people who are labeled as folk devils, in this case those involved with the public school system, become the focus of widespread fear and concern. This is typically due to perceived threats about societal values or social norms. These folk devils are portrayed in a negative light, which fuels exaggerated reactions that can lead to calls for often extreme intervention, like unschooling. This phenomenon can really distort public perception because these fears are amplified by media coverage and social discourse, which overshadows rational discussion and critical analysis. In such context, the urgency to protect the children, which again is a really noble endeavor, leads to a reluctance to engage with diverse perspectives, which is what I'm trying to do here. But when you refuse to engage with other perspectives, like it seems a lot of these parents are doing, you're really hindering the very educational process that fosters critical thinking and understanding, the very thing that you're claiming to support. Well, the idea that some people can get hysterical enough about the school system that they can full out deny their child a formal education might seem like a problem with this generation, which by the way is a super common scapegoat. It's always about this generation. I'd like to go over a few other moral panics in history that involve children. The first is the McMartin case. So the McMartin preschool case began in 1983, emerging from alarming allegations made by parents who claimed that their children were victims of ritualistic sexual abuse at the hands of staff members at this preschool. The accusation started when one mother, noticing behavioral changes in her child, sought the help of a therapist who suggested that abuse might have occurred. This led to a wave of similar claims from other parents, fueling a widespread panic that captured national media attention. Many parents withdrew their children from daycare fearing for their safety, which according to research surrounding this case significantly disrupted the availability of nurturing environments for young kids. This mass exodus deprived children of essential socialization and early learning opportunities and contributed to a lasting stigma against daycare providers. Despite extensive investigations and numerous allegations, no concrete evidence of abuse was ever substantiated. The accusations largely stemmed from testimonies provided by children, many of whom were subjected to suggestive questioning by the therapists. These interviews often included leading questions that could have influenced the children's recollections, resulting in distorted or false memories. The lack of physical evidence, such as medical findings or corroborating witnesses, ultimately contributed to the jury's decisions to acquit the defendants. The methods used by the therapists ended up causing this backlash, and rightfully so, but then they turned child therapists into the folk devils and called for a shutdown of the industry. Obviously, the implications of this could have been dire because now you're denying children access to vital mental health support. Instead of just blanket abandoning child therapeutic practices, we took the more practical and constructive approach of refining these techniques to ensure that children were being supported without leading them into confusion or creating those false memories, without using those leading questions, without causing fear in them. So this preserved the critical role of the child therapist while still ensuring the well-being of the children, which is exactly what I'm saying we need to do with the school situation. Next example of moral panic and folk devils is the satanic panic. The satanic panic of the 1980s and early 1990s was characterized by widespread fear that rock music, particularly heavy metal, and role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, also known as D&D, were corrupting youth, promoting satanic rituals and leading to teens unaliving themselves or getting hurt while playing D&D. Influential figures, including some religious leaders and concerned parents, propagated the belief that these forms of entertainment were gateways to devil worship and moral decay, and that they were dangerous. Misinformation ran rampant about music, claiming that songs contain hidden messages urging listeners to engage in destructive behaviors. High-profile cases such as the death of a teenager named James Dallas Egbert III in 1979 fueled sensationalized narratives suggesting that D&D was linked to his disappearance and subsequent death. Media coverage and some parental reactions painted a picture of D&D as a dangerous cult-like activity that could ensnare impressionable youth and lead them down a dark path. However, investigations into these claims revealed that the connections made between D&D and these tragedies were unfounded and exaggerated. In Egbert's case, while he did struggle with personal issues, including depression, there was no evidence to support the idea that D&D had a causal link to his death. Instead, many of the sensationalized reports often misrepresented the nature of the game and the experiences of its players. Now, if you were alive during this era, like I was, I actually remember my parents telling me that if you played D&D, you were going to wander off into a cave and get lost, or you were going to get depressed, that heavy metal music was the devil. That's a big reason that I haven't heard a lot of the songs that I react to, is because my parents would not let me listen to things like Ozzy or Metallica. Those just weren't really allowed, and I didn't have an interest because none of my friends were listening to it, so I didn't really have a drive to dive into that world. And there were just so many stories around it that, looking back now, were completely unfounded. Because in truth, both rock music, heavy metal music, D&D, these provided valuable outlets for teens during a time of complete social upheaval. Rock and metal music, as many of the people here in the community know, and as I'm finding as I'm introduced to more of this music and I get to experience it and think, that makes a lot of sense. Why it would help young people explore complex emotions, societal issues, personal identities, because it can offer a sense of belonging within subcultures. It can promote camaraderie among the fans. I know that for me it's a totally different story, but for me, when I was growing up, my big thing was NSYNC, and I had such strong camaraderie with my best friends because of that fandom. So I think that music can create such that sense of community and that sense of belonging that a lot of teens might not experience. Similarly, D&D encourage creativity, critical thinking, problem-solving skills through collaborative storytelling and character development, world building, so using your imagination. The game provided a safe place for teens to engage in their imagination, to explore moral dilemmas, to build these social connections with other players. Far from leading to moral corruption, these activities helped adolescents navigate the challenges of growing up, of finding themselves, that helped them foster a sense of community and self-discovery. Again, these exact things that we are being told that public school now doesn't do. Of course, all of these moral panics made total sense if we only listened to the media or biased individuals and didn't do our own research and critically think for ourselves. It's completely understandable to want to protect your children, be it from harm or from music that could lead them to be depressed, or a game that could lead them to get lost in a cave and die. Wanting to protect your child is a hallmark of being a good parent. But if you're not considering the potential consequences of your choices, if you're not willing to listen to the concerns of people that are more educated about certain things than you are, if your role models are random TikTok influencers, then there's a good chance that your decisions are not going to be well informed, and you're going to do more harm than good when it comes to your child. Which brings me to the feedback section of this video. So we did see the one girl who had expressed that unschooling had been a positive experience for her, and that's valid, that's her experience. But I want to weigh in with some other individuals who experienced unschooling firsthand and see what they had to say.
I was unschooled. I don't support unschooling, and I've gotten hate from parents who unschool their kids for not supporting it. Here's the thing though, I was unschooled, and you probably weren't. So here's why I don't support it. As a kid, I spent my childhood learning to play chess, circuit boards, knit, fun stuff like that. But I didn't want to learn to read, and I didn't want to learn to do math because that was boring. So in the rules of the philosophy, my mom didn't make me. So by the time I hit middle school, all the other kids were making fun of me for not knowing how to read. My mom signed me up for a junior high literature class in my homeschool group, and I didn't know how to do anything. To prepare for the class, I had to teach myself how to read because my mom wouldn't. I did this by watching YouTube videos and figuring out that they were saying the name of the video in the video and then figuring out what the words were. For high school, I decided to go to public school because I was not getting the education I deserved. And guess what? I immediately started failing. I didn't have the years of prior education building me up to prepare me for the level of work I had. I was kicked out before I got to graduate.
She touched on several of the points that we talked about, that unschooling isn't necessarily going to protect your kids from bullying, but in fact could exacerbate it later down the road. It's just putting it off, because when those kids wind up being ill-educated, they're going to get bullied by their peers, whether in high school or whether out in the workforce or the real world, when they can't read or they can't do basic math, skills that are necessary to thrive. And like I said, not all kids take interest in reading, or they might, as she said, find math boring, so they're not going to pursue that. They're not going to want to learn that, but they still need to, and they need that nudging, and they need some kind of structure. They need some kind of encouragement that they can learn those things and that they can be interesting.
But I'm getting more bold about stating my opinion and sharing my story. And as someone that was homeschooled, borderline unschooled, I cannot tell you how difficult life was to adjust to once I did join society. My parents definitely thought they were doing the right thing, but they left my sister and I a lot to our own devices when it came to school. After about 4th grade for me on, and when I finally decided I wanted to go to college, I had to get a GED, which at the time automatically disqualified me for a lot of scholarships because I didn't have a high school diploma. I had a GED. And then on top of that, socially, it was rough. It was really rough. I had a really hard time with the general education classes and had to get tutors for almost every single class except for reading and comprehension. Thank God. That's the only thing I managed to excel at.
Because that was probably her passion. So in her case, she loved to read. She loved to write and stuff. So if that was a passion for her, it makes sense that she would have excelled at that more. But that's another thing that they don't really consider, is what if your child does decide that later in life they want to go to college or they want to pursue some kind of particular profession? They're likely not going to be able to, because they're not going to have the ability to take a GED or to get into college. I actually got my GED. I was sexually assaulted my junior year. I ended up dropping out of school, partially because of that and partially because my dad was terminal and I wanted to help take care of him. And I took my GED. I did really well on it, and fortunately I've been able to go to college and stuff, but I did have the education to be able to pass that test. I did have the education to be able to do that, and I always was a very motivated child. I did a lot of learning outside of school and stuff. So again, she's bringing up the point that it's really holding these kids back if they're not doing something specific that, ironically, I know that one of the big points was independence, but you're saying, okay, I want you to be independent and be able to pursue your own things, but you're going to be pigeonholed into this very small pool of options when it comes to professions, because you're not going to have the education necessary to pursue a lot of them.
And it was probably just because I spent so much time on my own reading as a kid. But it was horrible. It was awful. It was so traumatic as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old going to college thinking, oh, I'm going to be okay, and absolutely just realizing I knew nothing and I was going to flunk out of college. And I had to work really, really hard to get back into a moderate level of really easy general ed classes.
This breaks my heart so much because, like she said, and like I concluded earlier, these parents often think that they are doing what's best for their kids, but they're not thinking about the bigger picture. They're not thinking about the future. They're not thinking about the repercussions that this could have for their kids socially and educationally, mentally, when they do go outside of the home, when they start getting introduced to other people, or when they start looking for a job or start trying to pursue interests outside of just the things that they've been taught as a kid. She said that she was homeschooled, borderline unschooled, and she didn't give specifics of what that means, but I assume that her parents probably gave some kind of structure, or maybe they got her workbooks or something and tried to encourage her to do those. But again, it comes to the problem of, if your kid is not interested in those things, they're not going to pursue them, and then they're going to fall really behind. Like, she was saying that she couldn't even pass general ed classes in college. Now, the next video is a bit long, but I think it really drives home some of the points that we were making and some of the things that unschooling parents might not be considering or might not be taking to heart. So I think it is an important part of the conversation.
So my backstory is that when I was a little girl, I was taken out of school in, I believe it was grade 2. I had a seizure disorder, and I was having a really hard time learning information that the teachers would teach me, and I had a really hard time fitting in. And that was due to this medical condition that I had. I can remember really struggling in school and really having a tough time just fitting into this hierarchical, kind of oppressive format that really homogenizes people and really wants you to fit into a system of norms, right? Essentially is what it is.
I will say that I very much relate to that. I was the lone wolf. I was the outcast. I was very ostracized by my peers. So I can understand. We don't usually think of that in context of grade school. We usually think of the cliques coming in junior high and high school. But I can remember as far back as first and second grade feeling like I didn't belong with my peers. I didn't belong in these groups. I wasn't accepted. And I think there were a lot of reasons behind that. I know that I had separation anxiety from my parents at a super young age. I know that I just had generalized anxiety, pretty sure that I had, have undiagnosed ADHD, potentially I'm on the spectrum. So there's a lot of things that made me kind of a social pariah in ways, especially back then. I grew up in a small town, so especially back then, very much made me a social pariah. And there was also the aspect that my parents did not have the standing in the community. They didn't have that social status. So I did tend to kind of be pushed out of peer groups. I did eventually end up finding my friends, but I did not have friends in school until 6th grade. My friends were my neighbors and stuff, and I connected with them, but there was still value in school even with that. But I can completely understand why children would look to unschooling and think it's appealing because they don't want to go through that, and why parents would look to unschooling and think it's appealing because they don't want to watch their children go through that. It's really painful.
I was definitely bullied a lot. I was the weird kid. I was the different kid. I was the kid who couldn't keep up in class. A lot of the teachers had concerns with my ability to learn information, and a lot of them thought that I was on the spectrum or had learning disabilities or intellectual disabilities. So when my parents took me out of school, they basically were doing so as a rebellion toward the school system, who did not support me properly. And basically they took me out and they kind of explained what unschooling was, and they didn't want to force me into anything. They attempted a couple times to do like more structured homeschooling approach with me, but basically I grew up doing whatever I wanted to do. Like, there was no formal schedule, there was no structure, there was no testing with the government, none of that. And I want to say too, like, I grew up with neglectful and abusive parents that were not, in my opinion, prepared to undertake a role such as this. I want to say that I think that unschooling is a really interesting approach, but I think that has to be done very carefully.
And we touched on this, that there is the potential for abuse and neglect to be overlooked if there's not some kind of figure, there's not some kind of overseeing entity that is checking in on the kid. And that's really unfortunate, and my heart really breaks for her. But she also touched on how her parents tried to do homeschooling for a while, and it's not easy. I know that a lot of people in the homeschooling communities in that world tend to kind of shame parents sometimes that are in the public school system, saying, well, if you really cared about your kid, I've heard these exact words, if you really cared about your kid, then you would pull them and you would homeschool them for XYZ reasons. And I think that not every parent is equipped to do that. Either they might be a working parent, or they might just not have the education and the knowledge of how to do that properly. Or maybe they struggle with their own mental disorders, and it might be very hard for them to be able to be around their kid 24/7. And that's completely okay, because at that point, there is very little time that you would have for yourself. And it goes back to, Kelsey did not say it in a tasteful manner, but it goes back to parents need time to themselves. It's a very healthy thing.
I agree with children's self-determination, and I agree with that the fact that they have a right to choose what they do and what they don't do to an extent. You know, for example, as a child, like, I would spend my days watching TV instead of playing with other children or learning other things, you know, whether that was through structured or novel experiences to me. And I think that really had a big detriment to my development, my brain development specifically, as a child.
There are so many studies that show what excessive screen time can do to a child's development, and she's absolutely right. It did stunt brain growth. It did cause developmental delays in her, I'm sure, because that's what research shows that it does to children.
You know, for example, it's very hard to determine what is empowering and what is neglectful to a child if you are not in touch with your child and your child does not know how to communicate their feelings to you.
And how would they know how if they've never been able to be in situations to learn effective communication except through one or two people? Because people communicate differently, and maybe your communication style doesn't match your child's, so they're not going to be able to communicate in the same way that you do.
It's a big decision to put on a child at, you know, whatever age, 6 years old in my case, probably around that age, whether or not they want to go to school or if they want to stay home and watch TV. Of course, they're going to choose TV.
And that's exactly what I was saying. There are plenty of children that are going to choose to just make TikToks or play video games or sit on TV all day or watch YouTube all day. And that's just not healthy for development. And they're not learning any practical skills. They're not learning how to survive once they're not under your roof anymore. This next one is the last video I want to share that's from an adult who was never enrolled in any type of schooling.
That's the questions. Does that sound good?
Okay. Anthony paused for a bit as he walked into the school building. His young sister, daughter Jessica, yanked the sleeve of his shirt forward. Schools made him uncomfortable, and this one, although it was small and welcoming with its cheery color and encouraging signs, was no exception.
So this man is now learning to read for the first time because he was unschooled. He was never enrolled in any kind of formal school, and now as an adult does not know how to read. And I find this both heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time. Heartbreaking that he was never given that opportunity, that he was denied that, but heartwarming because there are so many people that as adults decide to go back and correct that mistake. And that means a lot to me. I am an adult, I'm now in my 30s, and I'm going back to school because I dropped out. I regretted that, and now I'm going back to correct what I believe was a mistake. So I don't know this guy, but I'm so proud of him for putting in the effort, for putting in the time to educate himself, to learn to read, and nobody's pressuring him to do this as far as I could tell, just from a brief glance at his account. He's wanting to do this. To wrap this up, I'm going to rapid fire a few comments from individuals that had experience with unschooling just to get a little bit more insight. I'm 31, formerly unschooled, and lucked into a job field that's supported me so far. I'm now going back and working through Khan Academy so I can go to school. I had a 4th grade math education. I was unschooled in an abusive household, and at the age of 19, when I went to get a GED, I found out I had a 3rd grade education and couldn't pass the test. I'm now 29 and a college graduate, but it took so much longer than it ever should have. Don't do this to your children. I wasted my 20s catching up. I learned to read by texting at age 12 when I got a free Obama phone from the government. I have no self-esteem whatsoever because I still think I'm stupid. I wasn't going to comment, I was just going to read these, but if this person ever watches my video, or if you are watching this video and you might have had a similar experience, I just want to let you know you are not stupid. You are so smart for wanting to go and get educated, for pursuing that, for putting in the work, for being willing to learn. You're so smart, and I am so proud of you. I know that I'm a stranger on the internet, but I am so proud of you. You didn't know better back then and probably didn't have any choices, and you likely trusted these people that held your future in their hands and unfortunately didn't give you the opportunities that you deserved. But kudos to you for going back now and giving yourself those opportunities. Again, I am so proud of you. I attended high school with an unschooled kid. She was borderline illiterate at 16 and struggled with basic math. She only graduated when she did about 6 months after the rest of our class because she attended summer school, 0-hour night and weekend classes to make up for all the credits she was missing since middle school. She also hired me and other classmates to tutor her in English, science, and math so she keep up with the regular courses. Okay, so I guess I'm going to comment a little bit on these, but need I point out that she was not coerced or forced or pressured into doing this? She wanted to become educated so much that she put in all this extra time and effort to do so, and kudos to her. I was homeschooled until high school, and it was wild to see the spectrum between unschoolers who legit couldn't read and the kids whose parents made them do college-level courses when they were 12. Because when there's no oversight, when there's no structure, when there's no regulations for parents to follow, you're going to have certain parents who don't teach their kids anything and certain parents who go overboard and try to teach their kids things that unless this child is Doogie Howser, they're not ready for. And sure, there are going to be kids that can do college level courses at age 12. I was reading on a 6th grade level by the time I was in 1st grade. There are kids that are more advanced, but how do they know that? How do they know that their kids are prepared for these things? How much pressure are they putting on their kids to do things that, for all intent and purpose, chances are they are not ready for? Hi, unschooling survivor here. Can confirm being unschooled me up so considerably that even now at 24, I'm still struggling so hard to undo the damage it's done. Honestly, growing up, there was no environment in which the topic was brought up without really just being an excuse to be catty and cruel about kids that were weird or awkward. It made it really hard to feel comfortable talking about my experiences because 90% of the time, I was only met with blatant bullying from other kids and adults alike. Which goes back to the point that you're not avoiding bullying, you're probably just putting it off for a little while or maybe changing the reason for the bullying. Bullies will be bullies, they will find reasons, but not educating your child and thinking that that's going to protect them just doesn't. And that wraps up this video. Honestly, I am a-okay making an entire series out of the things that influencers are doing that negatively impact our society and our mental health because I am bold enough to say that I think influencer culture is driving us toward idiocracy at breaknecking speed. I'll say it again. I propose we drop the term influencer entirely and start calling them what they are, unregulated, opinionated people. But if you did like this video and you would like to see more of a series like this of influencer idiocracy, please let me know in the comments below. And as always, the comment section is also a safe place for you to share your mental health stories because that is how we shatter the stigma, is by talking about it. Give this video a thumbs up. It would mean a lot to me if you shared it. I really would like to expand this series, but I will see you soon. I love you guys so much. Mm.